So we're very happy to have Coach Alex Sarama here from, he's the creative director with Basketball Immersion. Last year we had Chris Oliver, who's the founder of Basketball Immersion, join us, and Alex comes highly recommended by Chris, and I got to know him a little bit just in the last few weeks and chatting and getting to see a little bit more what he does and how he does it, and even some sneak peeks. I loved your sneak peek you shared a few days ago of what your presentation is going to look like. And so looking forward to that. Right now, he is also in charge of player development with College Basket out of Italy. So physically, that's where he is connecting with us right now in Italy. And so without further ado, check out his bio on our website. And I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and I'm going to turn off my screen sharing. And if you can do yours, and you can take it from here, Alex. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Adam. Pleasure to be here. I'm actually in Germany with Chris right now, so we might get Chris on later to say hi as a special surprise. Let me share my screen. All right. So first up, really excited to be doing this. We're going to make this as interactive as we can over the next hour or so. So first question, and this is a reflective task which we're going to have throughout. I'm just going to give you guys 30 seconds, coaches, and I want you to come up with your own definition of conceptual offense. If you have no idea, it doesn't matter. You can try, but see if you can come up with your own definition of conceptual offense in 30 seconds, 1 or 2 sentences. Here we go. And if you feel brave enough, it would be great if you can share it in the chat box too on Zoom.
We'll use the Q&A area just so that we keep it all in one spot. If you have anything to share there, coaches. Okay. Thanks.
10 more seconds. Okay, coaches. So if you want to go ahead and leave, if you leave some of your ideas in the Q&A, I'm going to get them up too so I can see what you guys are writing. Cool. All right. So this is my definition right here. And this is essentially going to be the essence of what we get into today. And I think when we look at what conceptual offense is, it all starts with the pace. And we're going to be covering kind of my base transition theory and how we can really play with such great pace to seek out high value shots. The idea is that if we cannot find an advantage with our pace and we cannot end a possession of a high value shot, we immediately flow into triggers. And the most important thing here is these triggers, these actions are predetermined. So it's not being called out by a coach. Players have a choice of different triggers which they use, and they have to use them based on recognition of the situation they're in and what is best for the situation that they're placed in. The key part of conceptual is this advantage word right here. And what we're also going to get into is how we can play with an advantage. I call it dominoes, and how as conceptual offense teams, we need to hunt out dominoes every time we run these triggers. So we're just going to begin looking at what conceptual offense kind of looks like. So we can see here immediately just flowing out of transition. And there are different ways we can arrive down the floor. And the way we arrive, I call it our arrival spacing. It occurs naturally based on the transition reactions we apply. So here we can see we're in kind of a 5-out with an empty corner. And the idea is that we're immediately flowing into a trigger straight away. This clip here is a pick and roll. And the offense is just reading the coverage and coming up with a solution for what they're placed in. So this is very different to, coming down the floor, calling out a set play, getting into some type of pattern motion offense. The idea is that players will find an advantage like we see here now in dominoes and end the possession with a great shot. So there are many different actions we can use. I just showed pick and roll because it's the most obvious one, but I'm going to show later on in this presentation some of the different triggers you may wish to use as you go about building a conceptual offense with your team. Now, people think that with a conceptual, I think a misconception sometimes is that the whole time we are playing without sets. And that's actually not completely accurate. Now, the vast majority of time we are running and we're playing lag free, we're playing with our triggers, maybe 75%, 80% of the time, but there is a time that we can run sets. And this is what we're going to look at on this page here. And How I'm distinguishing it this year with my team in Italy is if there's a referee touch, i.e. if there's a stoppage, or if there's no referee touch. So on any situation where it's a live ball, i.e. we get a defensive stop or the other team score, we are running, and we are certainly running on misses, and even on makes we're running. You'll see the clips where we get so many just easy transition layups even when the other team scores. So the first one we emphasize is a lag-free reaction with our transition offense. So we want all our players, the moment we get possession of the ball, an instantaneous reaction, players winning those first 3 steps and really just sprinting up the floor full speed. And we do not play with a traditional outlet. A lot of teams play for all levels of the game, play with a traditional point guard outlet, and a player will come deep, come and get the ball. Whoever gets the rebound will pass it to them, and then they initiate the offense. So we eliminate the outlet because it greatly speeds up the time of transition, and it makes it much harder for the defense to load back. And this is something that is typically quite hard just for new players when they're being introduced to conceptual for the first time. For instance, this year with my team, I've got a lot of really good guards, good European guards, and they're used to always having the ball, and they were coming deep to try and catch it. We eliminated that, and we just go. So everyone has to go, and whoever gets the rebound is their own outlet. Once we're going to look at some of our other transition concepts in more detail, but the idea is that once we do that, if we do not have an advantage by the time we get down the floor, we have to recognize that instantly. And just like how we reacted to sprint down the floor, we also have to react with that same speed to flow into a trigger. So as opposed to over dribbling, getting stuck, calling something out, we recognize when neutral, there's no advantage, no opportunity to drive it, no pass ahead. The moment we get down the floor, we're into a trigger. And that is not called out by a coach. As you can see here, I've written no coach intervention. So this is completely player-led when there's no ref touch. The players connect with each other using verbals and non-verbals to flow into a trigger. Now, referee touches, that's a good opportunity where we can run a set play. And for context, with my under 20 team in Italy, we only have 2 sets. So we keep it really simple, and we use the same sets as our side out of bounds. And we have the main action within the set as a Spain pick and roll, which we also use as our base out of bounds. So it really, as opposed to just memorizing and filling the brain with all these patterns, we're filling the brain with concepts instead. We're teaching them how to play. And this is important, especially in my context, in terms of preparing my players to play professional basketball in Europe. It's important that they still have some experience using sets, and that's important. But the key thing is we're not running the set like we see typically in the NCAA, where the whole set is run as a pattern just to get to the last bit of the set. We're creative within the set. So that means the first action within the set, if we have an opportunity to create an advantage, we're going off script. We're not going to keep running the play. We're just playing with our Dominoes concepts, which we're about to get into. And that's the key difference here. Running creative set plays as opposed to rigid set plays. Now, if I was coaching an under 12 or under 14 team, we wouldn't play with any sets at all. We'd just play solely conceptual. But when players do get maybe to under 16s, under 18s, perfect to introduce them to 1 or 2. And obviously, if I was doing this with a professional team or an NCAA team, I would have a little bit more of an advanced playbook set-wise. And it's on the referee touches when the coach can have more intervention, because obviously it is a dead ball. Now, the most important thing when we start with conceptual is our shot spectrum. And even if you don't want to, fully implement a conceptual offense today, you're still going to have numerous takeaways regardless of whatever offensive system you use. And shot spectrum is one of these. And it came from a great podcast we have on the basketball podcast with Chris, in an episode with a New Zealand coach, Zico Coronel. And Zico talks about this analogy of imagining that you're going into an Apple store, and you're going to be there for 24 seconds, and every few seconds, the Apple Store employees are just handing out different types of iPhone. And they could be types of iPhone from a 2G back in the early 2000s to the latest iPhone 13. And you've got to think, if you are in that Apple Store and you get offered the latest iPhone 13 brand new at 21 seconds, you're probably going to take it and leave the store. But if you get offered those lower, those older iPhone versions, you're going to wait and be patient and try and get a better type of iPhone. And that is exactly what it comes to when it comes to our shot selection and those shots we want in an offense. And this is all just based on basic points per possession and the evidence which exists on high value shots. So this example right here, this is what I did with my team. This was the first thing we did this year. Before we stepped on the court for practice, we spoke about our shot spectrum. And you can see here, coaches, all the different types of shot that I put at the top and the different iPhone models. So what I had the guys do was fit in, our iPhone Pro Max. This was just before the iPhone 13, so it was outdated already, but I've updated it since. So you're gonna think, what is our iPhone Pro Max shot? What are the best shots we want in the offense? And what are the shots we're avoiding? And this shapes everything that you do offensively and defensively, because our defense is the opposite to this. We are baiting the low value shots while on offense, we're obviously striving to take the highest value shot possible. Now, I'm moving very quickly. I always move fast in my clinics because I want to give you guys as much as possible. This is essentially what we came up with as a team. So you can see here, and this was actually amazing because the guys came up with this themselves. I didn't really have to intervene and talk about much. And it was amazing because from the first practice and from the first game, the results of just implementing this alone were crazy. The first friendly game we played, the other team were basically taking all these low value iPhone shots and we were going for the high ones. And our offense, after like 1 week of practice, wasn't even that sophisticated, but alone, just by implementing shot selection, it gave so much confidence to the players in terms of knowing what we wanted. And we got a great result just from having a really clear style of play framework. So here you can see our kind of shot spectrum. Now, we do use a scoring system to implement this, and we use the same scoring system in all our small-sided games and practices. I print this up and I have it in the gym, so I just display this under the baskets, but after 1 week, the guys get it. And you can also change this in season if you want to manipulate constraints and emphasize particular behaviors. For instance, we had a really tough start, just giving up loads of offensive rebounds. So we put that into the scoring system. We'll probably play with that for a month before we change it to something else. And obviously you can see how this point system, it places a value on the shot spectrum that we want and seeking out those high value shots. Now, first thing we're going to look at is dominoes. And this is really important term, coaches. So dominoes comes from a great podcast episode, again, on the Immersion podcast with Ross McMains. And dominoes is the moment an advantage appears offensively and we drive and kick or move the ball to get a great high value shot. So we're looking for one of those shots that you just saw on our shot spectrum. We want to end dominoes with those shots as opposed to something like a contested fadeaway, which is our destroyed iPhone 2G. We're going to look at some different types of advantage we have in the dominoes video, but essentially the idea is that anytime an advantage appears, we are applying these 3 dominoes commandments. So concept number 1 is 0 seconds. On our Basketball Immersion YouTube channel, we have loads of free videos on the 0 seconds philosophy. Rule number 2 is we never allow one defender to guard 2 offensive players. And there are a lot of different concepts which fit in as part of that framework. And then the last rule is into out of space. And this means 2 things. This means anytime we drive and kick, we are immediately exiting, getting out outside the 3-point line. We're not standing in the space watching. It also means we are not catching the ball in the space. I like this. Mike McKay calls it creeping. We're not creeping in. We are spacing stretched outside the perimeter. So what does this look like in context? We're going to come on to that in a second. But first, I just want to talk about how we reinforce key concepts. So this is just something called a learning poster, just designed on Canva, really easy graphic design system. And for key parts of our conceptual offense and our team culture, we use these learning posters and we stick them up in the gym. We also have all the players who live together in their own kind of residency. So we put it up in the lounge just to reinforce and cement our terminology, and the key things which are important to us as a team. So you can sort of see these learning posters are a really nice way to cement knowledge of terminology. So let's take a look at dominoes. You're going to see here, my team, we like to keep things fun. So every few weeks we record new dominoes videos. And every time we travel for a new game to a different country, we do a different dominoes video in that country showing some dominoes falling over and then the basketball version. So let's take a look some dominoes clips. The first example here, now we're in dominoes. We got a big positional advantage with this defender out of place. So now this is where we got to apply those three concepts of dominoes. So it begins with our 0-second decisions. So here on this catch, are we going to catch, pass it, or drive it within 0 seconds? That's the first thing. The second thing is our one defender cannot guard two. I'm going to mention that in the next clip. And rule number 3, we can see here, out to space. So immediately after they drive and kick, you can see both these players having a great reaction, getting out to space. You can see another dominoes clip here. This is my point guard. He's 16, so I don't know where he got the car from. But you can see we start the dominoes right here. Now we're in that positional advantage. Now we're applying our 0 seconds. That could have been an open shot, but we go good to great. And now we end up with a high value shot at a good time in the shot clock. So those are some examples of what basketball dominoes looks like. But I will say this is really important. The pretty sequences, you know, those really long dominoes effects with multiple extra passes are great, but you could also get a really short dominoes possession if you instantly create an advantage, get a driving kick, and get a rob shot immediately. So dominoes is not just these pretty sequences you see with drive, extra shot. It could just be, you know, come off a ball screen, make one pass to punish a tag, and end up with a shot. So dominoes is the same regardless of whether it's a short or long passing sequence. Now, this is something I really picked up from Mike McKay. And when Mike was with me in Belgium a couple of years ago, we were speaking a lot about this and how back then I was doing a lot of advantage stuff and my team's dominoes habits were really good. But at the same time, defensively, the defense was so bad that the offense wasn't really getting good, punishing a good defense, and it kind of held us back when we were getting to play those good teams. So a lot of the stuff we're going to look at today in terms of how to teach is seeing if we can do concepts with two-way teaching. Can we shape both the offense and the defense? So you can see here, just in this diagram on the left, we've got a dominoes situation with a baseline drive. And now we've got to think, as we teach dominoes, how can we actually neutralize and stop dominoes at the same time? Because the goal of the defense is to get back to neutral. We want to get back from offensive advantage to neutral or even offensive disadvantage. So you can see here, we've got a baseline drive, and I'm big on this concept of peel switching. We've spoken a lot about that at Basketball Immersion, comes from Will Voigt originally, the idea. So the idea is, you know, how can we neutralize dominoes? Well, we use our peel switching. You can see the basic peel switch rotation on the left. And then on the right, you can see a small-sided game, which we would just use a 2-on-2, where we only have the offense and the low man, and then we have the defense and the high man. We just work on our peel switch. So that's just something to bear in mind as we head into the next clips. Can we two-way teach our dominoes concepts, but at the same time, getting our defense in to shape learning on both sides of the ball? Now, before we get into some of our small-sided games, this idea of the constraints-led approach is really important. This is something I've spent a lot of time over the last 4 years really researching and getting into. And the idea is it's the interaction of constraints between the individual player, their environment, and the specific task which lead to skill emerging. And this is very different to the traditional approach of basketball, which is typically decontextualized practice, i.e. On-air, unopposed practices, no defense, the reproductive model, which is passed down from generation to generation. And as coaches, we often coach based on how we were coached as players. And then it means just this whole cycle just keeps going on and on and on. Whereas the CLA is based on the idea of having more game representative practice. So for instance, different player constraints could be things like player size, wingspan, weight, perceptual skills. Environment are things typically like humidity, wind, court surface. So we don't have much control over those things, but the task constraints are the most important things as coaches. And these are the things that we've got to worry about the most, because the task constraints are essentially the small-sided games and the specific rules and the tasks that we have within those small-sided games that shape learning. And these are the ones that are most important. And if you want to build a good conceptual offense, using effective small-sided games and having representative task design is really important. So we're going to look at some teaching clips here. And this is an example of a small-sided game which I would use very early on in the teaching stage to teach dominoes. Relatively quickly, this was like very, first couple of weeks of my team, we would then start using dynamic starts and use our triggers to start dominoes, as opposed to doing a static start, which you're about to see. However, these static starts are useful in the initial learning stages. So there you can see I'm just putting a hand up to give the dominoes. And now we are applying our dominoes reactions. And you can see there, this is the importance of combining perceptual skills with technique. So you can see there, pass is slightly off. And this is how, a pass like that can effectively stop the dominoes. But this is exactly why we're working on it within the small-sided game, and we still end up with a decent shot. So this is just one example of 4-on-4 small-sided game we can use to build dominoes habits. What we can see here is an example of our 1 cannot guard 2. So on the weak side, I know you can't see it right here, but on the weak side right now, we have a 2 side. That means we have a player spaced in the corner, and we have a player spaced on the 45 NBA spacing. So the low man has gone to help. That means there's a take 2 defender with 1 defender guarding both players on the 2 side. Because our second rule of dominoes was we don't want to allow 1 defender to guard 2, we see in this clip a corner ghost cut, and we end up with that highest value shot that we have. So these are just some different ways we train those dominoes habits. You can see the guys doing a nice job with their ghost cuts there, but then at the same time, the defense has to drop to take that away. Now, this whole YouTube video, you guys can see, this is just a little sample of it. We released it just this week on the Basketball Immersion YouTube, so you can check it out after this if you're interested. Now, what I'd like you to think about is, this is your next reflective task. How could you potentially load this 4-on-4 you can see with the high 5? Or what are some different constraints which shape this learning experience that you're seeing in this 4-on-4 small-sided game? So have a think about that. What different individual and task constraints are there in here? Or how could you load it? We're just going to spend another 30 seconds on this. Okay, time. So let's just see if in the Q&A, guys, if you have any examples of constraints. So we've got passing off 1 hand from Niels. What's up, Niels? And Niels is one of the first BDT coaches in Belgium. So that's a nice example of a limiting constraint. Absolutely, you can specify 1-handed passes. For me, like I said, one of the most important things here would be loading in your triggers to create an advantage off that. Other loads could be distorting the spacing. So maybe you could put a player on the weak side dunker. So the 2 side as opposed to corner 45, maybe you have a weak side dunker and a corner, or 45. Maybe you have a 3 side where you have the weak side dunker, corner, and 45. So you load in an extra player. Maybe you could specify what reaction you would like to use as part of the 1 can't guard 2. For instance, you could say now you can only use a ghost cut. Another thing to just think about too is the role of individual constraints. So for instance, just things like using rotating players a lot on teams and having players used to playing against different people is really important, because things such as size and wingspan play a big role. For instance, if there's a really tall help defender coming across the help, or a really big defender who's making the peel switch, that's going to shape the offensive skill that's needed for that particular situation. So that's why I'm really big on frequently having guys play with and against different people in the practice, because individual constraints play such a large role. Most obvious load to this could also be loading in transition. And that's what we're going to come on to soon in terms of our transition theory. And I want to talk about how I would load that in. Now, as we look at the video, these are going to be the 4 kind of overriding features in this transition kind of montage we're about to play, clips of my team. So the lag-free reaction I've spoken about already. Second thing is going to be seeking the sideline. So essentially this means that as we react in transition, not only have we applied a lag-free reaction, but all players will automatically go up the nearest sideline. Even if that means we have an overload with like 3 on one side, we just go. The only time we go through the middle and we run behind, we can run through the middle is to get behind the defense. So that means if players are running up that sideline and we have an opportunity for a 1-on-0 or 2-on-1, then we will go through the middle. But otherwise, we do not play with a rim run unless we have an advantage situation. So let's take a look at these clips here. And you can see here, just starting off with a transition on 3 throws, you can see why playing with pace is so important with this style of play, with this conceptual offense. So again, getting high value shots early in the clock. Here we can see that reaction going up the sideline, getting into a full speed sprint. Same thing right there. So lag free, look for these early kick aheads. And if we can get multiple possessions like this a game where we don't even need triggers, then that's the best way to play. And it's really fun for the players, and it's amazing for developing skill. You can see some of these 2-side skip passes, 0 seconds now in Dominoes. So you can see there, great example of how transition flows into Dominoes. 2-side skip, we got a 2-on-1 advantage. So this is Dominoes, 0-second decision on the extra pass, 0-second decision on the drive. 1 can't guard 2, so we apply a push to stop this defender guarding 2, and then we end with the high value shot. I'm just going to let some of these clips play just so you guys can get a feel for how effective this style of play can be. And really important, just in all our practices, this is something we emphasize in every small-sided game or 5-on-5 that we do. Now, what you'll see on some of these clips is the closest player will inbound the ball, and that's really important to speed up the rate of transition. The closest player takes it out. Everyone else is just going. And especially for all the youth coaches on here, this is a great way to develop your players, which means anyone who rebounds the ball is going to be their own outlet and go on the dribble push, and that's a really important skill in the modern game. Linking back now to our shot spectrum that we spoke about at the start, you can see how this shapes our defense. So we bait a low value shot. Would be even better if we had a contest, but this was off a breakdown. So I would have liked it if we contested that. Either way, it's a shot we want other teams to take. Rebound, breakout dribble, kick ahead, and get the highest value shot and 1 foul. So that's a great example already of just how you can begin to apply some of these offensive concepts for whatever it is you coach at with your team. This clip here, like I said, in terms of running through the middle, so we've instantly recognized that there's an opportunity to get behind the D. There's no one there. So obviously in these situations, we'll go through the middle of the floor. If there was a defender or other defenders in front of them, then it would be seeking the sideline, filling corners first, and then we just immediately flow into our trans. But you can see here, great lag-free reactions. That may also mean leaking out. So if we can test a shot in the guard spot, we will just go. And to play with this, it's something we emphasize a lot. So for instance, in practice, we will typically we will have an assistant coach stat our lag-free reactions and stat our bolts because it's something so important. And then sometimes you'll also play, if you've heard some of my clinics before, you'll have heard about the golden snitch. Sometimes you'll also incorporate the golden snitch for teams who can get multiple possessions in a small-sided game or scrimmage where they apply all these reactions. Now, what happens after transition? So let's just say we've done our transition, but we haven't got any of those opportunities you've seen in the clip before. This is now when we flow into a trigger. You can see my definition of a trigger right at the top of your page right now. That's how I define a trigger. And it's really important that players flow into that lag-free. I differentiate between 2 types of trigger now. And this is something new. I didn't speak about this at the BDT bootcamp I ran in the summer. This is something new I'm doing with my team just since September. So fast ball triggers or slow ball triggers. So fast ball triggers we do on live balls, makes or misses. But when we are going on the push and we still have some speed, so we're crossing the half with a good amount of pace, and the defense is still moving a little bit. They're not completely loaded, not completely neutral. So we immediately just flow into these triggers, and you can see they're more typically a solo, like an instant 1-on-1 if it's the right time to solo, or it's a two-person action such as a DHO get or a pick and roll. We can do some three-person triggers here in terms of quick off-ball screens and pistol because they don't take long to get into. However, the player who is handling the ball has to recognize the spacing situation. And if they see that we're neutral and we aren't spaced with, we're not spaced well enough to have a third player join the action or, for instance, to set a screen away or to come for an action in the pistol, then they will immediately just flow into the two-person action. But if we see that we can run a three-person trigger, such as that screen away or a pistol without lag, then we will run that. A slow ball trigger will also happen on live balls. However, it's when the defense is almost completely neutral, so they're stationary, and the player we have bring the ball over is coming over quite slowly. And this is where we can run some four-person triggers, such as a stagger and double drag, and we can involve more players, and it's more intricate. And typically, these will help distort the defense a little bit more because we have more players involved in the action. Now we're just going to look at ways we can teach some of these triggers using concepts from the CLA. So first thing I spoke about was solos and looking for a one-on-one. This could be static or dynamic, such as using a blast cut. Now, under 16s, I speak more with solos in terms of knowing when to solo, using the license to kill, which comes from James Bond. So at U16s plus, players have to be smart and they have to only solo if they have a matchup advantage, a double gap, or a late clock. But at under 14s and below, I think using static solos and especially dynamic solos can be effective and a nice trigger to instantly get into dominoes. So here you can just see here, let's say we've got the ball handler and a guided defender X1. So this is one way we could develop the ability to solo. So the handler is going to come into the three-point line and they're going to take a skate dribble. A lot of BI members will be familiar with skating. This is a lateral dribble you take facing the rim, and you try and create as much space as you can with a high dribble to have to create time to read the defense and shift the defense. So one is going to come in, they're going to take their skate dribble. You can watch that on YouTube if you want to get a visual representation of what it looks like. And now we're going to use guided defense to get repetition without repetition, which is a phrase which comes from Bernstein and a key kind of godfather of modern CLA, if you like. So X1, they have three different ways they can play defense, and their job as the guided defender is to shape offensive learning. So we're not doing this 1-on-0 because it has very little transfer to the game, and we want to keep perception and action coupled. So we want to have players understand what the perception is, what the decision is, and then apply an appropriate solution as the technique and the movement solution. So we can see here the first option for X1 is as one skate dribbles, they're going to shade baseline and offer a straight line attack off the skate. After that, we're recovering, trying to play defense and get a wall up. I talk about being vertical like a skyscraper. Option B would be, as opposed to going up the straight line, they will shift and counter, forcing one to use a change of direction move. And then again, after that, they will go into their live one-on-one. So they get a primary decision on the skate, a secondary decision at the rim on their finish. So that's our option B. And the option C is as they schedule, guided defender gaps, gets a hand up, curing an obvious shot decision. So the idea is that the offense and defense will stay for 3 reps, but the guided defender will give something different every time. So it could be any combination. It could be CAB, BAC, CBA, ABC. The offense doesn't know what's coming. And this is a great way, like I said, to get repetition without repetition. And you can add extra variability into this by always going from a new location across every rep. Again, I would change pairs. So what I typically do is have offense go for 3, then they change, defense gets their 3 goes on offense, and then they get a new pair. Why? Because the role of individual constraints is important, and playing against different people in the practice, different heights, different weights, different sizes, wingspans, will shape different offensive skills and solutions. So that's one example of teaching solos. Now we're going to look at how we could teach a 2-person trigger with a get action. Now, a get is essentially a throw and go, but it's also a great trigger for under 14s. And this is because it bridges it's a great bridge with the dynamic one-on-one. So we can see here a get situation. So imagining we've arrived in transition, we're neutral, and we've got a player in the weak side dunker. So they're going to flash up and receive the ball, but they're immediately going to see if they have an advantage on the catch. Because if they have an advantage to drive it or shoot it, then we will take that situation because we don't need to actually come to the get and give the ball back to the passer. So this is a way, again, we could use guided defense to shape the get and get repetition around repetition. Defense doing something different every time. So obviously an overplay is going to lead to probably a backdoor cut or a backdoor and a seal. If it's still dirty, they'll get the ball on the back door. Option B will be shade left on the catch, so like a late denial. So 4 is going to catch drive opposite. C will be shade right, and D is gap. Obviously, we've got to make sure if it's a gap, we don't want to take the long mid-range 2. So that's something you can speak out with your team, or catching just outside the 3-point line. Then from there, we talk about neutral. So neutral is if 4 is neutral at the moment they pass it and their defender is chest to chest, there's no obvious drive or shot opportunity, then we look for the get action. So now the pass is sprinting and trying to get it back. At this stage, however, we got to remember the passer has to be deceptive and do something to try and arrive alone at the point of the get. So this could mean maybe they fake that they're setting a screen away for a teammate, instead they come for a get. Maybe they use a burst of speed. Maybe they fake a backdoor cut and come and get it. So we try and be deceptive to arrive alone. We want to avoid situations where the defense make it dirty and try and blow it up. And now we're playing a 2-on-1 off the get. So you can see here, just on this, I've loaded to a 2-on-2, but you can do this 2-on-1, and you're just immediately going into a 2-on-1, make a decision off that. You can also load this to 2-on-2, which is the next load. And now you can add different coverages to how the trigger is guarded. And this is how you, by building a conceptual offense, and if you want to use the BDT offense for your team, it's amazing because you come up with your whole defensive system at the same time. Because the whole process of teaching triggers is you teach the coverages and then you teach the coverage solutions. So it's a great way to two-way teach. So now you can see this is a 2-on-2 on the left. So imagine, or 2-on-1, we've passed it in, but we've moved the defender onto the passer. So now the defender of the passer is going to use different guided defensive options. So for instance, here you can see over blowing it up. Coverage solution for that is a Formula 1 or a NASCAR, keep curling, pivot, hit them late. They could also go under. They could also chase over, but make it clean. You could load it to 2-on-2 and switch it. And this is how you get all your coverage solutions in. And this is where you get into the true magic of the conceptual offense, because you're teaching your players how to play. You're not teaching them how to just read a pattern and how to be a robot. They're coming up with great solutions to make any defense wrong. And again, we can link this back into our solos. So for instance, we looked at the skate dribble before. Well, say for instance, we skate dribble, but we're still neutral. There's no obvious drive or shot opportunity. Now we can immediately flow into a get off that and run the 2-person trigger. So that's just a nice way you can link both the concepts that we just showed. And then of course, building it to some 4-on-4. So we looked at the Dominoes clips and the 3 rules of Dominoes. This is just a great small-sided game you can use to work on Dominoes. So defenders can either be weaving or they can be static, kind of both elbows and both low split lines underneath the block. The moment the coach says go, they can close out. And obviously the speed of the pass is going to determine whether it's Dominoes or not Dominoes. For instance, if the coach says go and passes the ball in quickly, that is going to be a domino situation because the defense is going to arrive late. However, if the coach says go and they pass in slowly, the defense are going to have time to close out. Then it will be neutral. And now you're looking to run a trigger. Could be the skate dribble or the get, which I just showed you. So one reflective task. We got 30 seconds here. I'd like you guys to think of one way you can load this 4-on-4, which you can see here. So it starts, like I said, with that pass in, but what is one way you could add a different task constraint or load this activity? Going to give you guys 30 seconds to come up with this. Coaches, if you want to start leaving those answers in the Q&A, that would be great. Okay, let's see what we got. Must specify the trigger. I like that, Brandon. That's a nice example. Constraining what trigger you want to use. Very nice. Change the spacing alignment. Excellent. Good examples right there. A key thing for me on this would be loading in transition. And, you know, a lot of coaches ask me a lot of the time, what is my favorite transition drill? And I'll be honest, in terms of, I don't really have a favorite transition drill, because great transition into everything I do and all the small-sided games I use in practice. So for instance, the best and most natural load you could have on that 4-on-4 is the moment defense gets the ball, whether it's off a make or a miss, you're loading in your transition. So now, as opposed to having all these rigid transition drills and these old school things like 11-man fast break, you're just getting it transition in naturally and getting in your different phases of play from all the small-sided games you use in practice. So for instance, we can load in trips. So for instance, as soon as defense gets the ball, it's going to be one trip up, one trip back. And now you're getting into all the magic of working all phases of the game. You've got your half-court offense, transition O, transition D, half-court D, which is everything your team needs. And that is the best way to check for retention and see if on those trips, can players recognize Dominoes reactions? Can they recognize neutral and apply it? And that's a great way just to check for understanding. Now we're just going to look at set plays and how we can teach set plays using a conceptual offense framework. Now, like I said, when do we run sets? Well, we only want to run sets on the dead balls. That's really important because playing with pace and using these triggers is how we're going to consistently create advantages. So we only use these on those referee touches. Now, this is my definition of a set. And a set is essentially a pattern of scripted triggers combined together. But the moment we find dominoes, we've got to do something to go off script and get a high value shot. So you can see in this example, this is an example of a set I run with my team. And when I identify a set, especially here in Europe, I've got to think of what actions do my players need to know if they're going to play on European professional teams, which are in a European playbook. So for that reason, we use a Spain pick and roll because it's something really common and it's something all my guys have to know. So we use a diamond alignment. So we're going to have 3 sets by the end of the year. All our sets will be done out of a diamond for reasons I'm about to mention. And we do have play calls. But you can see here just how we get into the Spain pick and roll. But the most important thing in here is how do we teach the main part of the set to be creative? And this is where the concepts behind the set are so important. So as opposed to doing these things 5-on-0 and just getting your players running these, you know, these useless patterns of play, we're working most of the time to, you know, if we want to teach the set, we're not actually going to run the pattern. We are going to spend most of our time on the Spain pick and roll and teaching the key decisions and reads out of Spain. We have a full YouTube video on Spain on the Immersion YouTube. I think it's about 6 months old, so you can check that out if you want to learn about it. But here you can see how I would teach Spain with my players. So we just run continuous 3-on-3 in the half court, and we applied the bursts concept to this. So this means the offense stays for a time period where they only play offense for a set period of time. And this allows them to get a lot of repetition without repetition because the time on task is so high. A lot of these traditional drills we see, a lot of time is wasted through rotations and a shot happening, and it takes like 20 seconds till the next rep starts. So I really don't like that. So in a lot of my small-sided games in practice, we use bursts. There's also a blog that we have on basketballmerchant.com where I talk about the burst concept and how you can apply it to any drill or small-sided game. Now, this here is just an example of how key coverage solutions and triggers and sets within the game. So this is a timeout from when we were in Slovakia about 2 weeks ago. And a lot of timeouts are spent typically drawing patterns, drawing stuff up, etc. Instead, we focus on a lot of the coverage solutions and we help players anticipate what their potential decisions are going to be based on the defense. So here you can hear me talking about Spain pick and roll in this play, and you can hear the cueing that we use. Perfect. So this is just Spain pick and roll video I reference, coaches. So this is me using the burst concept. So it's continuous 3-on-3. So you see the offense has to score using a Spain. Defense can use any defensive coverage they want. but the offense stays for a time period. In this instance, it would stay for 60 seconds. So you can see it allows them to get a lot of repetition around repetition and experience success using this concept. So as opposed, like I said, as opposed to running these things 5-on-0, I would spend all the time on the concepts that make up the set to improve the effectiveness of the set when it comes time to run it. I'm going to move on from this just for time. Sequencing of sets. So if you do have a couple sets in your playbook, you know, at the youth level, I really believe that you do not need more than 3. I have a really high level European team. We have 3 kids on national teams. We don't have more than 3 sets. So you can see here we use sequencing. So the 3 sets we do use are out of a diamond alignment. And this is the reason being it disguises what's coming for the defense. A lot of the time we see coaches have a different alignment for each set, and it makes it really easy for the defense to disrupt that because you can just immediately connect whatever the alignment with the actions that are coming. So we disguise it and we pair triggers within our set calls. So for instance, here we can see on the left frame, we can see fist out, which is diamond into a step up. And then you can see fist twist on the other page, which is similar in terms of it looks like maybe we're going into a step up, but instead we set a via pick and roll. So the idea with this is that, say for instance, we run that step up, the next time we run this diamond, the defense are probably going to be anticipating that. Maybe they start to prepare their coverage early and start to get that ready. And at the last moment, we veer off and set that via pick and roll on the screen away. So that's just the way an idea you can use to increase the effectiveness of your sets. When it comes to the continuum of offense, I think, you know, we've got this line here in terms of structured to unstructured. And you've got your traditional rigid set plays, etc., motion offenses. And for me, conceptual offense is very different to emotion offense. Emotion offense to me is a lot more rigid and it's not predetermined in terms of, you know, what's happening, you know, the patterns of play, players don't really go off script. A conceptual offense, we do have a structure because all the stuff that we looked at with our transition concepts, our triggers, the coverage solutions, well, that's all a base structure. But the idea is there's lots of room for creativity and for players to choose what they want to do in that particular moment. And that's what makes it such a good blend and what makes it so hard to play against, because it truly is impossible to scout. And if you teach the coverage solutions well, you're never going to get stuck by any type of defense. It is also definitely not read and react. Read and react is something we're going to speak about here. And conceptual offense is totally different because conceptual offense is based not on offensive automatics and where to move based on what happens to where offensive teammates pass the ball or drive the ball. It's based on what the defense does. And this is the most important difference. A read and react, it has very limited transfer to players that want to get to that next level, whether it's NCAA or professional basketball, because the game of basketball at the next level is based on reading the defense and punishing the defense for whatever it is. So of course, with things like a penetration reaction in the conceptual offense, you do obviously have to recognize when the ball is going. However, it's what the defense does, which is the overriding factor. For instance, let's say that we have a player in this on a weak side corner and the ball is driven from the 45 and it's driven middle. That player on the weak side, they could ghost cut, but if their defender is heavily packed into the paint, it would make more sense to hold the corner and get the high value shot. And that's just an example of how the defense at the end of the day is the most important factor in what happens next in our conceptual offense. Additionally, when we look at our shot spectrum, things like circle movement make no sense in the modern game when we want to have high value shots, especially those corner threes. And we looked at in the Dominoes, we looked at the rule 2, which was we don't want to allow one defender to guard 2. And things like these penetration reactions with circle movement, it's the opposite of that. You are effectively allowing one defender to guard 2, which is the complete opposite of Dominoes. Additionally, things like lane slides, well, in a conceptual offense, it's more based on more modern concepts within the game, such as shot spectrum, shot selection. Things like lane slides, we don't want to take those low value mid-range shots. So it's very different to read and react. Essentially, BDT offense comes down to these 4 phases of the game, which we've looked at, but must remember that most of the time it's the main focus is on dominoes, triggers, and transition. You can play classical, you can play sets. It has a time and place, but it's got to be the right place like we looked at. This is just my suggestion for when it comes down to kind of building your offense and even your defense. These 6 questions are the key questions I would ask for coaches at any level of the game. I think if you can answer these 6 questions with your staff, you're going to be in a good place to have a really coherent style of play, both offensively and defensively. Just going to finish giving you guys some documents. I'm going to breeze through these so you can screenshot them if you want. These are the season plans I use with my team in Italy. So you can see here, I'm big on tactical periodization. So I've learned a lot of that studying soccer. So I'm trying to use that in basketball, and in everything we do, we try and have 4 phases of the game present. So you can see here, like what we work on in September. I'm lucky this is based off having 7 team practices a week. And I have a lot of time with the guys. So obviously if I had a high school team or a youth team, I would cut this back a lot. And really just prioritize the things which are most important for the group. You can see here just moving on to October, what we've been hitting on this month, and then you can see November. But I think it's really important to have a season plan. It gives you a vision to follow, and it gives you some coherency. I think a lot of coaches are very reactive. For instance, after one bad game, talking about changing an offense, changing lots of things. And I think it's really important. It's really nice to have a season plan because it helps you kind of go along with that vision and keep that long-term vision in mind, which is really important, especially for anyone working with players who are like youth coaches, under 20, etc. I have a glossary too. So on the left, you could see an example of the glossary we use. This is really important for your staff and for your players. So we make it user-friendly for them. It's so important to have that terminology to be able to coach on the fly. Makes it much easier to coach in games too. On the right, you can see an example of a practice plan. Got a lot of these ideas from Mike McKay. So I'm big on checklists. So we have that checklist in the top right, which myself, my assistant coach, John Giesbrecht, a Winnipeg native. And I know he coached a lot of years at Manitoba. So John's my assistant coach, does an amazing job. So the 2 of us before practice, we go through this. We have our outcomes on the left. And then in red, we have the fact that it's not intended to be followed exactly to the script. This is the key thing I see with a lot of practice plans. They're incredibly rigid, and they also have time in there. You can see I don't have time in here because it depends on the rate of learning and what the players are actually understanding. And if we see in the practice plan, if we see in a small-sided game, players aren't understanding a concept or we need to go in another direction, we will. So it's kind of like, when we enter a practice, we're clearing a road, but along that road, we might branch off and create several different paths before we join the main road again. And it really, the practice we run is based on what we're seeing in front of us. So we never had a practice this year where we follow the practice plan to script. Sometimes it's completely different. And a lot of the time, we will start with 5-on-5 and just work backwards from that. So after the 5-on-5, I'll let the guys debrief. I'll do a 20-second huddle with my coaching staff, and we'll talk about whatever we need to do next based on what we've seen, like in the last 10 minutes in the 5-on-5. These are my player development plans I do. So every month, my players get a PDP, which is based on the 3 most important things they need. And obviously, this reinforces a lot of our conceptual offense stuff, but the goals could also be non-basketball related. So we have tangible ways they can measure their goals, and we match this up to all the video study that we do every month too. This is just some of the tactical periodization stuff. Now, I'm lucky in terms of I have full control of the players in terms of where they sleep, how they eat, times they eat. So we periodize everything, and then obviously on the most intense days, for instance, that's when the athletic development is going to be stronger, but they also need to eat more on those days too. So it's kind of like a whole holistic approach to how we're developing things. All right, so just going to finish off here, coaches. Just we're going to leave some time for questions and go through those. If you would like, we've developed through basketball immersion. I developed the BDT offense, which came out in June over the summer, and this is the world's first ever guide for teaching and developing a conceptual offense from scratch. So you'll be able to see here. This is just what it looks like. So we have 25 courses with we've got something like 200 different videos. So it's the whole theory of conceptual offense, but critically how to teach it. So every course, we have all these different focus points. And then each course page, we have interactive videos. So this is, for instance, showing the theory, and then everything also has how to teach it as well. So all the small-sided games I use, all the CLA, it's a really comprehensive program. And I know a lot of high school coaches in particular are using this, which is really cool to see. So check out the bdtoffense.com if you're interested in some of the things I've shared today. It's the normal price is $499 for lifetime access. We've got a one-off coupon here just for one user only to get $150 off. And then we also have a coupon code for the next 24 hours, which is Manitoba. So I just want to say a big thank you for dialing into this, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this on the replay. Really honored just to be able to have the chance to share the game and share some of the ideas that I'm working on. And this is always improving. I'm always adapting and improving this as I continue to learn more. My Instagram is Alex Sarama, or you can hit us up on Basketball Immersion. And that's my email address right there too on the screen. So with that said, I'd be very happy to take any questions that coaches may have.
Super. Okay, Alex, we got a few in here, and I'm sure there'll be a few more that will come. You can see I've trimmed out some of just the general feedback ones here, so you can read it as well. But the first one I see at the very top here, where do you put your shot spectrum in your organizational system? Is it considered a concept? It could be argued that the shot spectrum approach could be applied on defense, i.e. force used iPhone 8 or lower.
Absolutely. I think I might have covered that question straight after that answer. That question was posted because that was a good question. But yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the whole, like I said, with that scoring system, that kind of upholds everything that we do offensively and defensively at the same time. So everything we do in practice, we're using that scoring system. So obviously that shot spectrum is in absolutely everything that we do.
Okay, next question. How long does it take to put in the ABCD for the defense? You do it from the get-go.
Okay, so typically I would start with a non-linear approach. So non-linear means starting with the small-sided game in its entirety and letting the players do what they do with very little task constraints. So for instance, let's take the get example, teaching the get. I would start with that by just showing them what a get trigger is and then saying, go play using this 4-on-4, 3-on-3. So I want them to figure it out. That's like the phrase Chris Oliver and I use the most, figure it out. So naturally, as they do that, they might come up with some great solutions themselves. We might see some different defensive coverages, and we might see the offense naturally start to punish those coverages. Then we do a debrief after that, and we start to talk about it. And if players did some great things as solutions, we highlight that, and then it comes from them. After that, that's typically when I'd go to the guided, and I'd say, okay, now we're going to refine this. We're going to look at the different defensive coverages. Here are your ABCs. Go.
Okay, next question. Hi, Coach. How do you apply the domino concept versus teams that are sagging on defense?
Got to teach how to shoot. So shooting is the master skill. There's no quick fix if your players can't shoot the ball well. You may be able to emphasize ghost cuts more, which are really effective. So you could get more weak side ghost cuts. But at the end of the day, shooting is an everyday skill. It's the skill by far that we value the most. Every player on my team kind of has to be able to shoot a three. So we do that every day with all our small-sided games. We use like 2-on-1 shooting, 3-on-2 shooting a lot. We shoot Brads, backroom and down a lot, comes from Sefu Bernard. It's the most important skill.
Okay, I see one here. It's in the chat, so I just don't want to miss it. For a team that has a dominant 5 player and a decent 4 player, would your diamond offense be beneficial for them?
Okay, well, the diamond, I don't really call it an offense because it's just something we run only on as a set on some dead balls, and that would be maybe maximum 10 times a game. So most of the time that'd be conceptual because I want to develop, I don't want to develop players. I want to teach them how to play versus just running these sets. So even if we do a really good job teaching the creative reads out of a diamond set, at the end of the day, it's still better for their development to play with all the transition stuff and the triggers that we looked at. So I would emphasize their role more in the triggers. Also, if you have a really dominant 5-man, the idea is that because you play with such pace, you'll naturally, the defense is forced to scramble and they can't get the normal matchups. So in those situations, when you'll find like teams will just have they just have to scramble, and you'll end up with smalls guarding your bigs. We call that a mouse. So if we get a situation like that, my whole bench is standing up shouting mouse, 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 and the player who has the mouse will just immediately go to the smile, try and get a deep steal and post up. So that's another way we can break traditional transition spacing. If we don't have a like for like, if we have a like for like matchup, i.e. we have a big dominant player and a like for like, we can still post up, but I don't want them to post up to score because it's a low value play type. We can post up, but to run a trigger. So it can be a really great play type if you get the ball in through the T-post and then you run like splits, flares, shovel DHO actions out of it. That's an efficient play type, but I wouldn't post them to score unless they had a matchup advantage.
Okay, we got a few more here. The goal is to obviously be your own outlet. When you have a couple of guys who are not at that point in their development, what is your outlet concept at that point, nearest to the rebounder?
Great point. So this is the thing, it forces them with their development to naturally do that. So I'll put them in situations in practice where they have to do it in small-sided games because just the value, in the modern game, if you have a player who can't breakout dribble, I don't know really what their value is if they want to get to the next level. So I would work on it a lot and emphasize it with them and do it a lot on their PDP. If they really can't do it all, if it's a tool and a player who is a novice and new to the game, that's the one situation where I'd allow them to outlet because I want them to be confident and comfortable. But I'm working as part of their long-term PDP to get them to the point where they can break out dribble. I think a lot of the time players are just restricted because they never have a chance to do it and work on it in the practice. So just doing small-sided games, 2-on-2s, 2-on-1s where they break out dribble is really important.
Okay, the same coach, Shannon, just made a comment saying the Manitoba 1 discount says no longer valid. Just a heads up. So that may be something we just got to tell
maybe,
Chris,
yeah, it's probably because someone's gone on first, I'm afraid. They're quick to it.
Very fast.
Yeah,
so just, it may still take a moment for that to kick in. So try it again, I would say.
Whoever got that, though.
Yes, same person who just asked the question right now. Okay, next question. Do you limit certain triggers to only players, i.e. not every player can initiate a ball screen, only a big?
Okay, great question, Adam. So yes and no. I think at the youth level, have everyone do everything. When you start to get to under 18s or professional teams, then certain triggers can be for certain people, right? So then you just have to talk about, who has the most advantage in particular actions. Also, let's just take pick and roll. In a pick and roll situation, everyone can still do pick and roll, but you can have different coverage solutions to different players. For instance, if it's a guard and they don't create much of an advantage screening and slipping because they're too small maybe to receive pockets and pass it over the top, instead I just have them ghost screen. So you can also script particular coverage solutions to players out of the triggers. If it's like a player who can create an advantage screening, then maybe they can do everything. They could slip, they could flip, they could hold the screen, they could do via pick and roll, whatever. They could roll and seal. Whereas smaller players, maybe you just want to go screen. So absolutely, you can do that. Right now with my team, with under 20s, I'm having everyone do everything. And something I really like, something important too, is you got to consider who your best players are and your best prospects. For instance, I have 2 players who are really good prospects on the team. Maybe they have EuroLeague potential. So, and one of them's a 6'8" guy. So I'm having him handle the ball a lot and having the guards come and set like ghost screens and slips for him. Because long term, if he wants to get like to the EuroLeague, he's got to be able to do that. As a long term, he's probably a 3, but I want him to be able to build everything, but also play off the ball too. So also you might have to consider who your best long-term prospects are if you're in that type of development environment.
Okay, a couple more. We have many small guards here in New Zealand, and our teams have 1 or 2 players that may be seen as more traditional center. Is running 5 out beneficial spacing to develop these traditional positions at 15 to 17-year-old?
Nice question. Absolutely. 5 out, 4 out, 1 in, you can run conceptual regardless. I use 5 out more because it's quicker to get into. And we only use 4 out, 1 in if we have a big player who is posting up a mouse, or if during transition, if someone makes a cut to the rim to get behind the D and they don't get the ball, then they can go to the weak side dunker. Other than that, we're in 5 out the whole time. Like I said, quicker to get into, especially for the trailer. It can take too long if you've got to wait for the trailer to get down to that dunker spot or low post. Also, at the same time, a lot of people talk about this, but we're not in 5 out for long, because if we're neutral, we're immediately running a trigger and then we have double gap spacing again. For instance, say we're coming down, the trailer, if we're neutral, they're not going to go to the trail spot. They're going to go immediately into a trigger. So for instance, they go screen away. They will go set a drag screen. They're not going to go to a trail spot. So really, we're not in 5 out long. We're in those double gaps. I think traditionally, that's why things like the read and react offense I don't like, because it's, you know, if you're in that 5 out for long, you got loads of single gaps. It's a momentary 5 out. You're maybe not even in it for a second. You're going straight into your triggers and just playing off that.
Okay, one more question just in the Q&A, and I've got 2 peoples with their hands up, so I'm going to see if that will work in a moment. If I see Kent and Ty with their hands up, if that's a mistake on your side, put them down. Kent's head is up for a while. It may have just been you bumped it on the screen. But the last question we have in the Q&A right now is, what solutions are there to running conceptual offense when players may not be skilled or experienced enough to make all the reads, or maybe not strong enough to make certain passes like skips, jumps, skips, weekend, drive, drift passes, etc.?
Really nice question. So I would say you've got to start giving them the option to show what they can do. And they can learn through these small-sided games. And you've got to celebrate the small wins. So even if it's difficult, there may be situations where 1 rep every 2 or 1 rep every 3, they get it, and you celebrate the small wins. You've got to start somewhere. And if you start doing some of these things, kids can really surprise you, especially at that age. The kids are capable of some amazing things. And I think a lot of time as coaches, for the last like 50 years, we've handicapped kids through all this traditional stuff, and they haven't been able to show us what they can really do. So I would start with that, and then I would manipulate constraints if they really can't do it. So maybe, for instance, on a 2-on-1 shooting, instead of starting them out on the 3-point line, maybe they're at the elbows, so the distance is closer. Maybe you manipulate the size of the ball. So you use a slightly smaller ball so they can still get all these decisions, but it's age appropriate. Obviously, size of the rim is a massive one. Here in Europe, we're really lucky. We have low baskets all the time for minis. That makes a big difference. So I'd say just think about ways you could be clever with constraints to put them in situations either through the distance or space you're using to make it a little bit easier. But most important thing is just try it. Try it and see what they can do, and they might surprise you. Kids are really capable of doing a lot of good things if given the opportunity to do so.